السلام عليكم ومرحبا بكم جميعا في أولى جلسات الموسم الثامن لسبتية عبد الله العمري الثقافية AASCM لموسم ربيع عام 2020. It is my great honor tonight to welcome Fred Perry, who is very impressive, and I'm very excited to hear from him. Fred is a son of IU. He graduated with both his undergraduate and his master's degree from Indiana University. He's currently the director of development for Preemptive Love. He's lived in the Middle East for many years, in Egypt and Syria and Lebanon. And Preemptive Love is a coalition that stretches across Iraq, Syria, Mexico, and the United States and beyond. They work together to unmake violence and create the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. Fred has lived in 8 countries, like I said, and is first a citizen of the world. He loves to help bridge cultures and see people from diverse backgrounds discover what they have in common. Prior to joining Preemptive Love, Fred has led an international development efforts for Indiana University and helped develop and manage international capacity building projects in the Middle East, West Africa, Southeast Asia, Europe, and the Caribbean and Latin America. In his free time, you can find Fred spending time with his wife and 2 teenage kids and working to reverse the effects of aging by training for his next triathlon. So join us in, welcoming Fred.
Thank you. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This is great. Well, first I have to say, thank you for the kind introduction. And I do have to say that it's really fun to be here with Abdullah and what is continuing week in, week out as the AASCM gathering. It's been really amazing to see how it's just grown and continued and become such an amazing community here in Bloomington. Ustadh, it's always an honor to be in your presence and to see you again. So thank you for coming and for all you do for this community as well. Thank you. Shukran. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And all of a sudden, Ali's son is like an adult and a man. So, which our sons are the same age. They don't hang out, but they're still getting old and it's crazy. 18. Okay, so I'm going to start with. Actually, I'm going to start with just a little disclaimer. I know that this group and the purpose of this group is not to be political, is not to be decisive, divisive in that way. I will probably touch on some things that you might think are political or you might think or have to do, but they're not. And so hear me from the very beginning to say that a lot of what we do at Preemptive Love and something that has been very core to my entire being is about building understanding and love between people around the world. As you mentioned, I've been at IU. I've been at IU half of my life, in and out in some way, shape, or form. My father did his PhD here as well, and so it's just somewhere in the bloodstream. But the other half of my bloodstream is just full of the Middle East. It's always been a part of my life since I was 12 years old, when we moved to Egypt for the first time, and I just fell in love with the region. I fell in love with the people and the food and all of it, and I always want more of it, even when I'm here in Bloomington. So it's good to be here with you guys. I'm going to start and ask you. I'm going to just go ahead and carry this. Think back to when you were young. Some of us are younger than others. We're all at different stages of our life. But what did you enjoy doing? How did you see the world? When I say young, let's say your first memories. So that might have been when you were 3. I don't know. Maybe some of you remember before that. Did you see difference? Did you look at other kids? Did you see difference? Or did you just see another kid playing on the playground, playing in a home with people's friends and their kids? Did you see rich? Did you see poor? Did you see color? Did you see religion? Or did you just see another kid? How did that change as you got older? Okay, so now you're 4, now you're 5, now you're 12. You're a teenager, hormones, all that stuff. Think about the difference between your relationships as you started to get older. And what was it that changed that relationship or those relationships between people? What acted as an agent of change for you or for me? Reflected on a lot of this over the last year and a half. I left IU a year and a half ago, by the way, from working there for 9 years. And the last year and a half has really been a lot of soul searching. I don't think I knew that at the time. So think about that and think about how we change and how we evolve out of childhood into an adolescent and then into an adult. Into a young adult. Many of us in the room are young adults going out into the world, excited. But what has impacted you? What has changed the way you see the world? What has changed the way you see your neighbor? What has changed the way you see someone on the other side of an aisle, or in another room, or in a different community, or from the perspective of the global stage, from the news and what we hear about people? Okay, so now, I don't know if everybody in this room, okay, I'm sure everybody was at least young. So now, where were you on 9/11? Take a second and think. Where were you? How did it impact you? How did it impact your friends and your family? How did it impact those on the other side of the world from you? And I think all of us were in different parts, probably, of the world. How did it impact people here in the U.S.? How did it impact people where you were? So, I told you a little bit about my background. I grew up in the Middle East, a lot in Asia and other places, but when I was young, it was, Asia and Europe and eventually in the Middle East, and that became a part of it. My wife and I left Bloomington, Indiana, where I did my undergrad as well, in 1999. We left for Syria. My wife had never lived overseas before. She had never left the U.S. By the way, I'm not keeping track of time, so okay. Give me like a 5-minute warning and I'll speed things up. So we headed off to Syria. For me, it was going home. For my wife, it was going to a foreign land and something new. But we came back from Syria in 2001, right before 9/11. We landed in Phoenix, Arizona. My wife was pregnant and went right into high risk. She had to stay in the hospital for our first child. And 9/11 happens. The first thing that happened for me was I went straight to the people I knew. My heart was concerned for the people I knew, that violence and ignorance and things would be committed against people who were innocent because of what had happened. That was where my heart went. That is where my mind went. But I don't think that was true for most people. Actually, I know it wasn't true for most people. So, on the other side of the world at the time, although I'd just come back to the States, we were in Syria, but then 9/11 happens. Jeremy and Jessica Courtney, the founders of Preemptive Love, were in Texas. That's all they knew. Small town Texas, very focused on that way of seeing the world, that lens, no other lens to look at the world. And they were stirred by 9/11 to do something. They didn't know what. But what it led them was leaving the U.S., leaving their comfort zone, and heading to the Middle East. Heading to the Middle East with what they will tell you now is a very ignorant, very not a lot of knowledge on what they were doing. It was purely following their heart, as often we do as young people. They landed in Turkey. They spent about 3 years there learning Turkish and working in Turkey. And they eventually decided after a visit to Iraq to move to Iraq with their newborn baby girl. Still very ignorant, still not knowing what they were doing, but just with a desire to do something to counteract the violence that had so just kind of overtaken the world and post 9/11. If you think about the name, preemptive, and Ustad said, how do we translate that in Arabic? I have no clue. I really don't. But the word preemptive, how many of you remember where preemptive came from? I mean, it was around before. But what do you think of when you hear the word preemptive in terms of what I'm talking about right now? Again, not to be political. This isn't political.
Iraq.
Yes, Iraq. What about Iraq?
Would take preemptive action to prevent weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah.
Levied against.
Right. So preemptive action, a preemptive strike from the United States into Iraq at that time because of the fear of weapons of mass destruction led to the almost decades of war that we've seen in the region with U.S. involvement since then, correct? So the Courtneys, our founders, are heading to the Middle East. This is what is happening. People are thinking, the people from Texas that are going almost side by side with them, they're going with a different heart. But their friends and people they've grown up with are going with this idea and this fear that if we don't do something, the world is going to fall apart. Our world is going to fall apart. We're going to have everything wiped out. Because look at what happened. We have to stop it. And many people were going with the idea of saying the preemptive strike, shoot first, ask questions later. It was a very aggressive approach to what was happening in the world. Jeremy and Jessica thought about, what are we going to call it? What are we doing? At the time, they were working with war widows. And it moved into an opportunity to work with young kids who had heart defects. And they said, what are we going to call this? And so, well, what is the opposite of a preemptive strike? What is the opposite of when I strike someone just because I think they're going to strike me? They haven't struck me yet, but I'm going to strike them before they strike me. I'm going to make sure I take them out before they take me out. What's the opposite? Preemptive love. To love first and ask questions later. To choose to believe the best in someone before getting to know them, knowing their heart, before taking action, before anything else. You can say that is an action, but choosing to love first. So this was happening on the other side of the world. Of course, I had no clue at the time. But where there was a precedent now in the world for preemptive strike among the world's powers, it really became, something the opposite was needed, and preemptive love was established at that time. So preemptive love, really, fear leads to violence, if we think about it. Violence leads to war. And preemptive love unmakes violence and changes the ideas that lead to war. And this is what really gave rise to this organization. So I won't go into all the things. I'll share a little bit. Where are we at? About 10 minutes? 10 minutes. Okay. I'll share a little bit about what we do and why we do it. And I'll go back to that story when Jeremy and Jess were in Iraq, still trying to figure out what to do. And they had a young family come to them and ask if they could help their niece who had a hole in their heart. Some of you may be aware at the time, heart defects in Iraq were 15 times the global average due to chemical warfare. So children who had very curable heart defects had no hope because doctors had either left and hospitals were destroyed and the waiting lines were incredibly long for kids to get these treatments. So that was where it all started. A young couple from Texas decided to try to find ways to get surgeries for these young children. And it started as a very grassroots effort where kids were getting surgeries outside of Iraq in the beginning, and then we trained doctors, and then we built back up the infrastructure within Iraq to provide these. So we had thousands of kids that went through these heart-saving surgeries, and then it was handed over to the Iraqi government as doctors were trained. Around that time, and we all know the history and what happened, but when ISIS started coming on the scene, we had developed a lot of partnerships throughout the country that allowed us to move right into relief work. And here's where, when I talk about where we were and I talk about where our hearts were, all of this, the foundation was peace building. The foundation was saying, even for kids who needed heart surgeries, would they be able to go, for example, would a Kurdish child and family be willing to go to Turkey for a heart surgery and have Turkish doctors work on their child? And they would, but fearfully so, and they would come back as ambassadors of peace. Guess what? Listen, all this stuff that the world goes through and politics and this and that, at the heart of it, these people love our children. They want to heal our children. And so it was, this peace building thing was starting. So after that, with relief efforts, as the situation changed in the Middle East, we were in a position where we had about 10 to 15,000 donors, mainly in the United States, that were funding these efforts in Iraq. And it allowed us to really do more on the front lines of warfare. And at the time, there were very, very few organizations that were on the ground, that were working in the cities and on the outskirts of the cities that were being impacted by the violence. Fast forward a little bit, in 2016, we started to get involved in Syria in the same way. We were involved in Syria by finding a local partner, by partnering with them, listening to what the local needs were, and then going out and telling the story out to the world. One particular story from a friend of mine from Deir ez-Zor in northeast Syria is actually, he's from, where is he from? From Raqqa. He had smuggled himself back in to Syria to visit his family in Raqqa. He was exiting back, going back out, and standing at the border, and a young girl was standing there, and she saw the barbed wire, and she saw the towers of the security, and she said, "That's why no one is helping." He said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "No one knows. There's barbed wire, there's these things. No one knows what's happening in Syria. That's why no one's helping us." It just broke his heart, as I'm sure it does all of ours. A kid thinking, the world doesn't know, this is why we're not there. From the early days in Iraq, in the early days when we got involved in Syria, our commitment was to make this a global peacemaking effort where we bring people from all backgrounds, from all religions, from all ethnicities, from all cultures, to build peace with one another, to heal the things that are tearing us apart, and then to see us preemptively try to reduce the risk of violence in the future. So out of the ashes of conflict, helping families then, after relief, to create jobs. I just brought one little thing, one example, many of you know, from Halib, from the soap in Halib. We've started many soap businesses with refugees who, these are their businesses. They do these locally. They sell these in their local markets. And then we buy them wholesale, sell them online, and then put all the profits back into new jobs. In the last 3 months, go back to Iraq, one example is we've been working in the old city of Mosul. And the old city of Mosul, as you know, or may know, it has been completely destroyed and flattened. But people are returning. They're coming home. They're rebuilding their homes with whatever they can. And so we've partnered with these families, and we've partnered with Iraqi organizations, and then called to the world and called to people and said, join us. Come in. Help these people rebuild. And it's not giving a handout. It's not saying, here's money for your food today, and here's money for your food tomorrow, and here's money for the food for the next 10 years. No. It's, here's something that will help you start a business. Let us coach you. Let us help you. What did you do before? Can we help you get back, reclaim what you lost? Sheep herders, farmers, people doing sewing, people doing their own crafts. All of these things are things that people can get their hands on and reclaim their dignity. So we've seen thousands of families and communities start to rebuild out of the ashes of war through job creation. We're working now in the tech sector. So it's a beautiful thing. Anywhere in the world, people can pull out their phone and they can make money, except for those that need it the most, because no one's given them the tools. They might have the phone, they might have the internet connection, but they have no clue that anywhere in the world they can make money on this phone. So we're starting to train refugees and internally displaced people and host communities on how to use technology to make money in the global marketplace. Web design, coding, micro work. So every time you get on the phone and you start trying to get into something, they ask if you're a robot, and you put in you have to click on all the stop signs. You're doing work for some company that's teaching computers how to recognize stop signs. So now we have refugees in Iraq doing that for big data companies, for Amazon, for insurance companies, and it allows them to have a source of income as they move in and transition back into new jobs and other jobs that they can get. 10 minutes? 2 minutes. Oh boy. Okay. All right. So I was like, man, that just went up. These job creation and bringing it all back and bringing people into the room take you back to when you were a kid again. I think most of us would recognize that our kids would play with anybody. Doesn't matter color. It doesn't matter race, religion, creed, anything. You put them together, they might fight. Yeah, we learn how to fight, but then they make up and then they're friends, right? How do we get back? How do we get back to that place, to trusting one another, to choosing to love anyway? We started out loving first and asking questions later. That was easy for a while, but then really hard when you've been burned, when you've been thrown in jail, when you've had death threats against you. But then we had to choose, we choose to love anyway, regardless of how ugly the world gets, regardless of how ugly something or how fearful I might be about someone who is different than me, that someone who is not like me. I choose to love anyway. And I choose that because that is the only way that we can find our way back to one another as we were when we were kids and heal what is tearing us apart. So, thanks for listening. That's Preemptive Love. This is my community. I love you guys. I don't even know half of you, but I do. Because at the heart of it, we all have the same core humanity. And so, thanks for being here. And time for questions still? Okay, awesome. All right, I think we have 10 minutes for questions. Okay, 10 minutes for questions. Nothing's off limits, except for political things that are divisive.
Support for these great efforts that you are really conducting worldwide.
Thank you for asking, Ustad. It started from grassroots funding. We have about 80,000 people around the world now that support our efforts from all backgrounds. This is a place for all to come. We have small family foundations. We don't rely on government funding because we don't want to be directed by what governments want us to do. There's always an angle. So we want to do what's best for our friends in Iraq, Syria, Mexico. We're now working in Venezuela as well. And we've worked in some other countries as well. So it's people like you. It's people all around the world giving $5 a month to $30,000 a month to major gifts, to things like that. But it is really it's the power of the people, empowering people. I'll tell you a quick story. This soap, so Marwa and Zido are one of the families that make this soap, right outside of Suleimania in Iraq, in the Kurdish region. This family lost half of their family. Their Yazidi family from Sinjar, from the Sinjar mountain area. Half of their family was killed in front of their eyes. They fled. They had nothing. They got to their camp outside of Sulaymaniyah. And it was because of donors around the world that we could give them a small business grant of $1,000 and teach them how to make soap. That they now have not only their soap business, which if anyone has been to the Met in New York, they ordered 20,000 bars of soap recently for their display on Babylonia when they were doing ancient Babylonia. We have groups in London that are ordering 15,000, 20,000 bars of soap for big conferences. And when that goes back, when Marwa and Zito hear that and their family, they're like, what? We have to fulfill an order of how many bars of soap? All of a sudden, I mean, imagine. And then they look at a magazine. You guys can take a journal on your way out and they go, oh my gosh, like people around the world are ordering this soap. How many have seen Frozen? The animated, okay. So Kristen Bell is the voice, right? And Kristen Bell is a big fan and a big supporter. And this is her go-to Christmas gift, along with candles made by women in Baghdad that we support. So it's all fueled by us. I was a donor 3 years before I came on staff with Preemptive Love. It's how I found the organization. So yeah, that's how we get there. Thanks. Other questions? Complex, yeah.
How do you choose families to help, and in what ways do you help other than teaching them how to run like their business or how to code?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have a lot of programs too that are especially for women and children to work on trauma, but trauma they see trauma very differently, particularly since they've all gone through this shared trauma. We have a lot of programs for kids as well, just to learn to be kids again and to play and to enjoy their life. So they're called child safe centers that we have throughout Iraq in particular. Then we also would do a lot of maternity care. We do a lot of medical care still on that front. And we choose families for the jobs or for the IT training or individuals for that based on we do an assessment of vulnerability. So there's a lengthy interview and there's a lengthy kind of process that they have to go through that shows that really they're the most vulnerable, that they're the ones that need it the most. Are they able to put food on the table for their children the next day? Do they have family that can help them with loans? If they do, we look for diversity. We want to make sure that our tech hubs and all these other things they're representing all of the people in a community. A lot of aid, and this is what happens with political aid often, is there's something tied to it. Well, we're going to help minorities because minorities have suffered the most. And I put that in air quotes because sometimes they have, sometimes they haven't. Sometimes the majority, there are people suffering, they just happen to be the majority. You don't see the suffering that's happening. So we try to make sure that we're representing all people in a community so that there's not, you see it throughout the world, like if the host community is now losing jobs because refugees or immigrants or whoever is coming in and taking those jobs, now the host community is like, wait, what about us? So we try to assess all of those needs and make sure it's people that really need it and can benefit from it and can impact others once we help them as well. So does that answer it for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
للأسف الشديد وقتنا خلص بس شكرا جزيلا.
Shukran. Thank you. And can I finish with one quick thing?
Sure.
Okay, one quick thing. Thank you, by the way, for coming. Ustad, you asked. If you guys are interested, you can learn more. I'm going to send you home with a journal. You can check it out. You can learn more about who we are on our website. There's a blog. There's a podcast that goes in seasons. There's the film. But if you do feel engaged right now to join us, to really heal what is tearing us apart in this world, you can go to your phones, you can text 72,000, text to that number, and all you have to type in is "end war" without a space, and that will take you right to our donation page where you can either give a one-time gift or join us as a monthly donor and be a part of this global effort on healing all that's tearing us apart. So, thank you. Thanks for having us. Shukran.
Well, on behalf of our community, with this certificate of appreciation for your coming and give us this excellent lecture and full of information, original topic. And thank you very much.
Thank you.